forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Merry Christmas and welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Deace. It's the final one, we think, of 2020. Want to welcome in my co-host, the one and only Aaron McIntire. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I could be a lot better, but I could be, or a lot worse, but I could be a little better, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Sporting those Hawkeye colors, as you should be, number 16 in the college football playoff rankings after an 0-2 start and a race war of an offseason.
Yeah.
And a top 5 college basketball team. So who says you can't survive a race war nowadays? Iowa Hawkeyes seem to be doing pretty good with that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it was like maybe a 100 to 1, 80 to 1
Right.
proposition, something
Right.
like that. But by golly, we became your Washington Nationals ticket from a couple of years ago.
Yes, I mean, the old Kirk Ferentz has a few Lazarus tricks up his sleeve yet, right?
Literally a few.
And then that basketball team with the amount of offense they can put on the court, it's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, the amount of weapons they put on the floor. I mean, you're putting up 91 on Roy Williams, and Luka Garza doesn't even have an average game, let alone the kind of game you probably thought he was going to have in that environment, right? And you're still putting up 91. A lot of weapons on the floor for Iowa.
It kind of reminds me of that Villanova national championship team from a few years ago. Except that team got really, really, really hot. This is just kind of baseline right now for Iowa.
Yeah, I'm very, as a Michigan fan, I'm well acquainted with that Villanova team from a couple of years ago. Yeah, they took us out behind the woodshed on that last Monday night. Anyway, let's get to it. It's the Big Five here on Bigger Ten, the 5 biggest headlines we're going to be looking at. And let's begin with the championship game that will take place this weekend. Ohio State versus Northwestern it is. And I don't know what kind of odds, if I would have just come to you one-on-one at the beginning of the year, and I said, hey, I'm going to be the book here, okay? And you've got to bet at least $50. What kind of odds do I have to give you to put $50 down minimum right now? Somebody else other than Ohio State represents the Eastern Division in the Big Ten championship game, right? I would imagine you'd at least made me get to 10 to 1 before you'd even contemplate it, right?
Yep.
At least 10 to 1. Well, so it's no surprise that Ohio State is here, but Northwestern went from first, remember they were in this game 2 years ago, lost to Ohio State and Urban Meyer's last Big Ten game, but they went from first to worst and back to first again. And it just goes to show you can't hide your quarterback in college football. The difference, and it's not like Peyton Ramsey deserves to challenge Justin Fields for the all Big Ten quarterback, but just being, sentient, competent, having full motor function, right? Being able to dump the ball down to somebody on 3rd and 5 or run for a first down on 3rd and 4. I mean, the way they play elsewhere at Northwestern, if the quarterback can just manage the game and make a couple of plays, either with his feet or his throws, then they are a factor in that division, and we saw it this year.
Yeah, and, hats off to Northwestern. Oh, my gosh. I knew I had to get that out fast. Hats off to Northwestern because they have an identity, and that's really, really they've been called the Stanford of the Midwest for how long, or the Stanford of the Big Ten for how long now? But it just bears repeating. This is their second appearance in the Big Ten championship game in the last 3 years, I want to say. And so that takes a lot of player development at a place like Northwestern, which goes back to that coaching staff and the culture and the attitude that Pat Fitzgerald has instilled in that program. And the second part of this as well, because it takes so much player development, if you have a drop-off at any position, especially the most important one on the field, that's going to show everywhere else on your team. So they upgraded that, and they somewhat fixed that problem this year. And I would say, looking ahead to this Big Ten championship, I would not be surprised, and I don't think anybody should be surprised, if we saw a repeat of last year's Big Ten championship game, except the colors against Ohio State are going to be purple and white instead of red and white. I totally think because Ohio State has not really faced a defense like Northwestern's going to throw out there, and they haven't faced a pesky offense like Northwestern's going to face, like they're going to face in Northwestern, ball control type of game. I would not be surprised if Northwestern's actually tied or winning at halftime. Now, I think the second half is a different story. You're not going to be able to keep all of those horses in the barn for the entire game, and I would expect even Ohio State to probably cover the spread in the second half. But I think we could see a very, very similar game play out to what we saw last year in the Big Ten championship game. I don't think this is going to be a 49-0 or 49-2 or 49-7, 42-7 type blowout type of game. Not that anybody's predicting that. But when you see Ohio State versus Northwestern, it's still really hard to get past the notion that this is going to be a cakewalk. It's not for Ohio State. I think it's going to be a really, really ugly, really fascinating game for the first half. But then in the second half, I think Ohio State, like I said, too much talent. They're going to get theirs at some point.
Could be the final game for Mike Hankwitz, who's done an outstanding job for many years as the defensive coordinator at Northwestern. Depending on the bowl situation, I mean, we got teams dropping out of bowl games right and left. There's a lot of programs around the country that are clearly just tired of the COVID protocol. So unless they're playing for big stakes or just saying, see on the flip side, I would imagine Northwestern will play in a bowl game, but just in case, and we forget, Mike Hankwitz has been a phenomenal DC at Northwestern for years. Might be his final game, and I would imagine they're going to go into this on Saturday night saying, hey, we're going to make Ohio State execute by matriculating the ball down the field. We are not going to let Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave 50, 60-yard touchdowns at a time. We can't keep up with them. We got to see if we can force them to play in the muck, win in the pitch, so to speak. And I would imagine they're going to try that game plan, which is why I agree. In the first half, I think it may take some time for Ohio State to adjust, but in the end, eventually, too many game breakers for the Buckeyes. And they do something that's never been done before in the history of our league, Aaron. And that is win a fourth consecutive undisputed Big Ten championship. We've had teams over the years win 4 or 5 in a row, but a few of those might have been shared. No one has ever won 4 undisputed championships in a row in the history of our conference, and Ohio State is going for that history on Saturday night. Now, that will not be the only game played. We have this Champions Week, although at this point now, I'm not sure anybody else wants to play any of these games. These were supposed to be the matchups. Now, I believe, let's go through these one by one. I believe Nebraska and Rutgers is still on.
That is correct.
Okay. If I'm Nebraska, I don't want any part of that game. And because I'm expected to win it, but I don't think it's a cakewalk to go in there and win it all. I mean, Greg Schiano has established a semblance of belief with that program. Yep. The culture there is changing. Now, talent-wise, they've improved, but they're still precipitously behind most of the teams that matter in our conference. But he has established a baseline of belief there. And you saw last week against Nebraska, every time you want to believe in them, they faceplant. Man, if I'm Nebraska, I was not happy to see that because it's like playing a MAC team. I gain nothing. If I win, I was supposed to. If I lose, I'm a national story, right? So that game is on. The other matchups that we have going on this week, Purdue, Indiana, the second time, the old Oak and Bucket rivalry game, that's been canceled. Minnesota, Wisconsin, the battle for Paul Bunyan's axe. Right as of now, game is still on. Yep. Illinois at Penn State, as of now, that game is still on. Lovie Smith's final game, coaching the Illini. Michigan and Iowa has already been canceled. Now Michigan is over 50 players between positive tests and contact tracing that they are done. I told you a few weeks ago I didn't think they were playing another game this season, and that was confirmed earlier this week. And then I still think as of now,
that is correct.
Michigan State is at Maryland, but it's going to be without little Tua, who is sitting out for a positive COVID test. So your thoughts on the Champions Week matchups that it looks, aside from the championship game, that it looks like we still may see here on a Wednesday?
So there's only really 2 games that I'm interested in. I think it's that Nebraska-Rutgers game, actually. I think that will be an interesting game because if you're Scott Frost, listen, you've escaped all of the ire that Jim Harbaugh, the type of ire that Jim Harbaugh, at least for the most part.
Yeah.
I am starting to see some rumblings, though, from Nebraska fans that they are
losing to Minnesota at home, who has minus 30 some odd players.
Losing
that was a bad loss.
Here.
Yeah.
If you then lose to Rutgers, and I think if they lose to Rutgers, they're probably going to lose convincingly. That's just, what do you have to build on after that going into next year? I mean, you can punt, figuratively speaking, of course, and just say, hey, this is just a weird year, but not the way you've done it. Not the way you've done it.
See, that's why I said, if I'm them, I don't want to see that matchup.
Yeah.
If I do anything other than win this game by double digits, it to some varying degree, it puts a bad taste in everybody's mouth going into the offseason. Now, they could play in a bowl game if they want. There are no requirements for wins this year. They're still a big brand. We're seeing teams drop like flies. So maybe they go ahead and decide to play in a bowl game so they can finally play the non-conference game the Big Ten didn't want to let them have. But man, the game itself does them no... There's 4 different outcomes for this game for Scott Frost, and really only one of them is a benefit to his program.
Yeah, and they really haven't been blowing the doors off of anybody so far this year. The other game is Minnesota-Wisconsin. Just because, again, it's a strange year. That's always in the caveat when we have these conversations. But I want to see what the motivational edge is for both of these teams. If they view this as a springboard into going into next year and trying to make a statement, because it has been, for both teams, a rather disappointing year, COVID aside. I'm really interested to see who comes out there like ready to play and rearing to play, because that's going to tell me a lot about, I think, the offseason for both of these teams, whether or not there's still some belief there for PJ Fleck, whether or not Wisconsin is still Wisconsin. They're in Madison as well. So I think those are the 2 games this week that I'm really interested in seeing. Michigan State versus Maryland. I mean, the forecast for that game is sadness. And one more note as well on Rutgers. I think we said on this show back when the Big Ten schedule was announced for the 3rd time, Rutgers was probably going to be the leading candidate to screw everything up with COVID. Right now, they, along with Penn State, I believe, right? Because they're still on with Illinois. They're going to be one of only 2 teams to play the full 9-game schedule.
Yeah, I know.
How weird is that?
And it turns out the team that wrecked it for everybody, in the first half of the year was Wisconsin. Yeah. No one would have predicted that given the strong culture within their program. But then the other program that did it for everybody was Michigan. And I mean, that was the program that all offseason led the way in the Big Ten with COVID testing and negative results. They were one of the few programs that never had to shut down the entire offseason, any portion of camp or offseason workouts whatsoever. But I think what you've watched the last few weeks for Michigan, particularly after the Penn State loss, I think you saw those players kind of let go of the rope, if you know what I'm saying. That I'm just tired of swabs. I'm tired of being, isolated. We're not going anywhere anyway. And we've seen this at other schools this time of year around the country too. Hey, all of our season goals are done. Why am I still doing this, right? So Illinois asked the question, hey, why are we still doing this? And the answer was, that's why we got to make a coaching change. The Illini moving on from Lovie Smith. He did take them to their first bowl game last year since 2013, but they still finished with a losing record. Didn't have a winning record any season he's been there. He arrived shortly after signing day in 2016 with a brand new athletic director. That AD is moving on from the former Super Bowl coach. Your thoughts on this move? Were you surprised by it whatsoever?
No, and I mean, you hear people who know him, other coaches,
they love him.
Nothing but good things to say about Lovie, and he seems like a guy most of the players seem to like. He developed somewhat of a culture on defense, or at least an identity on defense. I mean, they took the ball. I mean, they really got off after the ball, and that showed up last year. Not quite as much this year, and caused a lot of turnovers. But at the end of the day, it's result oriented, and the results just were never there for Lovie, unfortunately. And so for Illinois now, I barely remember the days growing up where Illinois was respectable in football, but right now they're just kind of a bye week on the schedule. They are the new Rutgers if this trajectory that Greg Schiano seems to be building, stands up over in Piscataway. So I don't really know where you go from here if you're Illinois.
I would go to Army, hire Jeff Monken, and run the triple option. I'm dead serious.
Zach, when everybody else is
do something different. It also closes the talent gap. It creates a schematic advantage week in and week out. I'm the outlier program. It's absolutely what I would do if I were Illinois. And I'm a little bit older than you, obviously, so I can remember times that Illinois has been very successful. In the early 80s, the Big Ten experimented with a round-robin schedule for the first time, and for a long, and I still believe they're the only team to ever win the Big Ten by beating all the other teams. They went 9-0 when it was still 10 teams when they won the Big Ten in 1983. And that was a team that had Tony Eason, the New England Patriots QB, when they got destroyed in the Super Bowl. They had him at quarterback, or was that Jack Trudeau maybe? So maybe I don't remember. There were the Kurt Kittner teams in the late 90s. They won the Big Ten, I think it was, in 2001. There was the team that got the at-large bid to the Rose Bowl with Richard Mendenhall and Juice Williams. You can probably remember that team, right? That was only about 10 years ago. And there were a couple of times that at the end of Bo's tenure and in his last 2 years at Michigan in 1988, 1989, back-to-back, they played Jeff George in Illinois, and those games were in November for the Big Ten championship both years. So there has been success in my lifetime at Illinois. They've just never been able to sustain it for a long period of time. They achieve it, and then it whatever works against them, and they're never able to sustain it after that. So I think Luke Fickell's their number one. I think Luke Fickell is a lot of people's number one. Whether Illinois is the job that he'll walk away from Cincinnati for, I doubt. But if I were them, I would hire Jeff Monken in Army, and I would go all out with the triple option. Hey, laugh all you want, but Paul Johnson won ACC championships at Georgia Tech doing that. And you guys played him in an Orange Bowl one year.
Yep.
You can do this at the Power 5 level if you're the one team zigging, as you said. Well, everybody zags. Now, today is National Signing Day. Well, the early one. We'll have more on these recruiting classes in February when they're completed. But and kids are still making their decisions around the country. It's a weird year. No one's taken official visits or anything. Everything's been done over Zoom. So as of right now, when we are taping this at about 3 p.m. Eastern, these are the current recruiting rankings in the Big Ten according to 24/7 Sports. You can see Ohio State is number one, and it's not even close. Now, it looked for a while like they may end up with the highest rated class of all time. Now they may not even have the number one class in the country. This is still going to be one of the best classes, though, that a Big Ten team has ever had. Michigan is solidly number two, but just to show you the distance, right now, Michigan's ranked number 10 nationally, according to 24/7, and Ohio State is number 2. So there's a distance there between Ohio State and Michigan. In fact, you can see the distance between Ohio State and Michigan from 1 to 2 is more than the distance between Michigan and Wisconsin from 2 to 3. Wisconsin right now has the 15th ranked class, according to 24/7. It would be their highest rated recruiting class ever. Maryland is in the top 20. Penn State is having what most schools would call a good recruiting year. But by their standards, being a fringe top 25 class, that's not what they're after. Iowa is just on, and Iowa and Nebraska just on the, and Minnesota really all. Iowa's, I think, right around 25th. Nebraska and Minnesota are right outside the top 25. And Mel Tucker in Michigan State's first year, right now they're at number 33. So your thoughts overall on what you're seeing from the Big Ten in recruiting, Aaron?
I think this is kind of a par for the course recruiting class, with one exception that's sticking out to me, and that's the obvious one. I mean, we've got them ranked in how they stack up against the rest of the Big Ten on the screen here for those of you watching the YouTube show. And that's Maryland. They have the 4th best recruiting class in the Big Ten. That surprises me. I'm not sure about you. And you mentioned the other one, Penn State. You would expect it always to be Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, something like that.
Yeah, some order of that, yeah.
I always get really, really concerned when Wisconsin has a highly ranked recruiting class.
Because you're doing a bunch of games without highly ranked recruiting classes, right?
That is precisely is precisely right.
Yeah.
And then Michigan State, that is a little bit of a surprise. Purdue, that should be. I don't.
That's the number that stuck out to me. I mean, clearly the momentum is dissipating in Jeff Brom's program. He was doing top 25 classes just a couple of years ago.
Exactly. So that's another one that sticks out to me as well. But you would expect at this point in time, Maryland and Purdue to kind of be flipped, but that's just not the case.
And the way that recruiting works, Indiana will see a boost off of what they did this year in next year's class, particularly because of the lack of visits and everything else. And I think with Tom Allen's persona, him getting a chance to get to know you personally is probably a big factor in his recruiting. The team I would be concerned about is if I'm a Purdue fan, because that's a sign that the buzz that Jeff Brom had created has clearly evaporated. And now, man, if you're Jeff Brom, next year you got to be thinking it's go to a bowl game or you're out of here. Maybe you should have taken that Louisville job at the alma mater a couple of years ago. All right. Speaking of moving on, let's talk college basketball. Conference play has kind of already begun in the Big Ten. We have a few games already, but there's still a couple of non-conference games to go. Ohio State is playing one. I think it's North Carolina or UCLA. I believe they're playing this weekend. It's UCLA, actually. But for the most part, non-conference play in the league is done. We'll go full throat for conference play here after this week. Conference games the rest of the way. We don't have those NCAA rankings that they do that are really the only rankings that matter, that determine who makes the tournament, right? But for now, let's look at Ken Pomeroy's analytics. And these are his analytic rankings of the best teams in college basketball based on efficiency, strength of schedule, etc., heading into action on Wednesday, December the 16th. And what you're going to notice, if you look here, and we scroll down to the rest of his top 40, Ken Pom started in 2002. It's almost impossible to be in his top 40 and not make the NCAA tournament. It's almost never happened. It's happened like 3 times, like ever. 9 Big Ten teams heading into tonight's action in his top 40. 9 of them. Iowa leading the way at number 4. There's a couple of things that surprise me. I'm surprised Michigan State's played a lot better schedule than my Michigan Wolverines have. I'm kind of surprised that he's got Michigan ahead of Michigan State. But that stuff will work itself out in a 20-game conference schedule. The big number is 9 Big Ten teams in Ken Pom's top 40 here as we start heading into conference play. Aaron, night to night in this league, you're not going to win this league, Aaron. You are going to survive it.
Yep. It sounds like the same conversations we had ad nauseum when we first started this podcast almost a year ago. Night after night after night, it was just a dogfight that came down to basically the final buzzer and basically the last couple of minutes of every single ball game. And when you've got 9 Big Ten teams that are vying to win the league, within the top 40 nationally, when you're talking about 250 teams or whatever that number is, or is it upwards of 300? I can't remember.
Over 300.
Over 300 teams. That says a lot. What I will be interested to see, because the net rankings, as you said, are really the only rankings that matter at the end of the day when it comes to seeding in the tournament. How much, though, should this be subjective? Because obviously, once conference play begins, you start to go into a little bit of a vacuum, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So could a 2, 3, 4 loss Big Ten team win the conference, maybe win a game at the tournament, and then losing that you've got a 5-loss team? Could they be a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament just because of how just grueling the conference is? That's going to be something to watch going forward, because I would hate to see a mid-major team that goes maybe throughout the entire year with 1 or 2 losses, but they're not nearly as good as maybe the 3rd best team in the Big Ten. I would hate to see them seated above a Big Ten team. That's going to be conversation for March, late February and March, but I think that's going to be something to watch going forward.
Scroll up to number 4 where your Iowa Hawkeyes are, and I'm going to be fascinated to see this. How good is Iowa in their offensive efficiency? Well, they're number 1 in the country in offensive efficiency. But to still be ranked number 4 when you're 75th in defensive efficiency, means you're not just number one in offensive efficiency, you are number one in offensive efficiency, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to be fascinated to see how that plays itself out over 20 games, but especially the second round of games. When we've got scouting reports now, and I've seen you already against my team, and I play you a second time, right?
Yep.
Can I D you up? I'm going to be fascinated to see how that is going to go. And it's going to, look at Ohio State. 11th in offensive efficiency, but 36th in defensive efficiency. That's not typically Chris Holtmann basketball. Usually those numbers are kind of reversed, right? It's just, there's going to be a huge contrast in styles across the league as well. Michigan and Penn State played the first game in the Big Ten this year on Sunday, and you see Michigan with a top 10 offensive efficiency, and it was first one to 60. And the Penn State game won, because right away, the first 5 minutes of that game, I've been bitching and moaning about Michigan's defensive intensity and consistency on Twitter during our non-conference games. First 5 minutes of that game, Aaron, it was like I was watching a different team. It was like our guys were like, all right, guys, Big Ten play. We got to actually play defense now. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so I'll be fascinated to see if we see some of that from like Iowa. They're like, all right, man, Big Ten play. Time to start throwing some elbows. And of course, refs swallow the whistles. And you were kind of like, yeah, there's no fans in the stands, but there's some normalcy there. Big Ten refs swallowing the whistles, clutching and grabbing everywhere. First one to 65 wins.
Yep.
A little normalcy in 2020, right? So we'll have a lot more on basketball when we come back after the holidays. But when we come back after this, it's our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather next. Here it is, our weekly game of Big Ten Would You Rather, when we find out what do Aaron and I really think about what the other guy thinks. Here we go. Would you rather, Aaron, get rid of instant replay in college football or have every call under instant review by a command center at Big Ten headquarters? Which would it be?
I would rather get rid of it altogether than have every call under instant replay at Big Ten HQ. Let's say someday in the not too distant future, my Iowa Hawkeyes are 9-3 or something like that, playing in the Big Ten championship game against 11-1 Ohio State. And the only way Ohio State's going to get into the college football playoff is if they beat Iowa. And lo and behold, those fighting Kirk Ferences come out there, and late in the fourth quarter...
He's in year 32 in Iowa City.
Yep. It's a 4th and 1, and Iowa's running back gets it by the hair of my chinny chin chin. Wait, replay review. We're going to take this to Chicago.
JT was short.
He got it. He didn't get it. He didn't get it. You know that would happen. Although the likelihood, I do concede, once the playoff expands, the likelihood of that type of shenanigan happening probably decreases. But still, I don't trust that more than I can throw it.
All right.
Next one is for you. Would you rather be Greg Schiano or Mel Tucker right now?
Wow. You know what? I think I'd rather be Greg Schiano. Because I came into the job with I was already, who's that guy? No, they know me. I built this program once before. We were at one point ranked number 2 in the AP poll when I was here. So these people love me. They'll give me time. They already gave me more of a recruiting budget and a lot of other accoutrements that what Rutgers has never, ever ponied up for before. I don't have an in-state rival, and let alone one that's the winningest program of all time. Yeah. Granted, they look down right now, but still, it casts a big specter. So I think Michigan State fans should be pleased with what they saw out of Mel Tucker. At the very least, you have to think you have a competent hire when you weren't even sure about that. But for him to win the couple games that he did, with no offseason whatsoever and the team that he has, you have to feel good about that. But I think I'd rather be Greg Schiano. I think that, and maybe we saw that play itself out the very first week of the season. That's a good question. All right, for you, would you rather open your presents on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day?
Well, of course, the answer to that question is yes. Why not both?
Why not have enough to do both? Yes.
Yeah. But if you put up a gun to my head and you made me answer either or, I would say Christmas Day. I'm a purist. Sue me. But yeah, I would say Christmas Day. Wait until Christmas. There's nothing quite like the magic of seeing other people excited to open presents on Christmas Day. Of course, when you're a little kid, I mean, just being so excited on Christmas morning, you finally get to see what's inside that wrapping paper on Christmas morning. I think you wait till Christmas Day. Final one is for you. Would you rather be a Michigan or Rutgers basketball fan right now? And try to remove as much bias as possible. I know that's impossible, but
sure. I mean, listen, Rutgers has not made the NCAA tournament since 1991 when they played your Iowa Hawkeyes. That's the last time they made it. Now, they would have made it last year, but of course, COVID interceded. They look really good this year, and I like their coach. I think Steve Pikiell's a good basketball coach. But, I mean, Juwan is sitting on a team that, I mean, is pretty deep and talented right now. I mean, they're averaging something like 40 points a game off the bench. Now, some of that's going to change with Austin Davis being hurt and Hunter Dickinson starting now. And he has the #1 recruiting class in the country coming in. You could make an argument that even though he's only in his second year, because of how big of a star he was in basketball circles before he came to Michigan, you could argue he is the biggest coaching star in our sport that hasn't even been to a Final Four yet. So I'd rather be a Michigan fan, but I think from a basketball perspective, there's maybe 6 or 7 teams in our conference right now and even teams that have history, would I rather be an Indiana basketball fan right now or a Rutgers basketball fan? You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Nobody in our league has a better basketball history than they do.
Yep.
I think I'd rather be a Rutgers basketball fan. The fact that we could even ask this question and have it not be dismissed just shows what a hell of a job Steve Pikiell has done there at Rutgers. No question about it. Here's a question for you. It wasn't on the books. Is this the best pair of coaches Rutgers has ever had at one time in the sports that matter the most, in Pikiell and Schiano?
I think we maybe need another year, but given Schiano's history at Rutgers, I think the answer right now is trending towards yes.
I mean, Rutgers is dangerously approaching competency as an athletic department. Okay?
What?
Yes, I know. We'll come back, wrap things up here in a moment. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, will Lovie Smith at Illinois be the only football coaching change made in the Big Ten this offseason? Wow, big number. 78.9% of you said no. 21.1% of you said yes. How would you vote on this one, Aaron?
I would vote no. I think Michigan and Harbaugh, of course, that's another one. I would say, depending on how Scott Frost handles this week, I would say there is a very slim chance. Okay. There's a very slim chance that could happen because I think the way that he's responding to these losses, Kirk Ferentz was clapping. It felt like we had a media timeout on he's just creating excuses. I'm seeing that type of stuff really rub some people. It's very
petulant.
Very petulant. That's a good word for it. So I think if he has a meltdown or something, that could be a yo moment. But I think Michigan for sure. And then I'm trying to think of who else. I don't really think anybody else is really on the hot seat this season.
It just seems like Michigan and Harbaugh, that couple that are deciding, do we want to get divorced now, or we were planning on taking the kids to Disney next year or the Caribbean or something. So do we just grind it out for another year and do that family vacay because we know we'll just do it in a year anyway? That's kind of what Michigan and Harbaugh feel like. They both know this thing's over, and they're just deciding whether they want to go ahead and
that is bleak
and finish it out now or wait a year and delay the inevitable. That's what it feels like to me anyway, as a Michigan fan and somebody who knows some people that are close to that situation. Let's get to this week's question of the week. What do you think was the best Big Ten win in the Big Ten ACC Challenge? I thought it was Penn State at Virginia Tech. They were up there 17-3 at one point. Never really let Virginia Tech in the game. They were ranked 15th in the country. That's Virginia Tech's only loss. They turned right around and beat nationally ranked Clemson last night in the ACC. So, I mean, that in terms of what you had for expectations and then what the result was, I'm going to vote for Penn State going into Blacksburg and just absolutely blitzkrieging Virginia Tech. What about you, Aaron?
No, that's a good one, especially because that was the type of win or loss for Virginia Tech that you thought, well, maybe there's something wrong with this Virginia Tech's team. And then you watched the Clemson game last night. Nope, they're still pretty much the same. What happened to them is a Big Ten team came and played them. So I would say, though, it's going to be Illinois over Duke. I mean, dude, you made Coach K.
You made him quit.
Look like the biggest petunia on the face of the planet.
We're canceling our non-conference season. There was one game left against Gardner-Webb.
Yeah.
And he made it look like they were, hitting the COVID panic button. I mean, come on, man.
So to me, I think Illinois. That's
a good call,
crushing Duke. That was probably.
And that's the Iowa fan giving props to Illinois basketball. Yeah. So you know that was a big time win right there. Yeah. Everybody have a great Christmas. Happy New Year. We're going to see you again on Bigger 10 after the first of the year. You guys have really helped the show to grow. Our views have been increasing substantially. Thanks to all of you. Hope you had a great holiday. Stay safe. If you're all healthy, you can get together with family. If not, make smart, wise decisions. And for Aaron McIntire, I'm Steve Deace. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. We'll see you on the flip side here on Bigger 10.